Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining Community Conversations today as we discuss the future of learning in the age of a pandemic, a discussion with the New York State Teachers of the Year. And here to do a welcome from the School of Education at the University of Albany is Dean Jason Lane.
Great. Thank you, Jerry, and thanks to all of you for being with us today. We're thrilled that you took a little time out of your busy schedules to be part of what I think is just an incredibly important conversation. School of Education at the University of Albany was founded in 1844 as New York's first public teachers college, and we remain at the forefront of preparing teachers and educators, leaders, policymakers, and researchers and the next generation of teachers for New York. And part of our dedication to New York State, we have been very, very interested in making sure that we can support our teachers and parents and students as they are grappling with this new age of learning. And so several weeks ago, we created a new website called remoteed.org, where we have provided resources on how to learn in this remote environment, as well as a curated list of online resources by grade level and subject matter that students, parents, teachers can use as we navigate this new space. But we realized it was also important to come together in community for conversation, to think about collectively what this new world might look like moving forward. And so we've been hosting these weekly conversations now for 7 or 8 weeks on a range of topics about how do we support kids with special needs in this environment? How do we think about mindfulness and trauma and well-being during this time? But today we're really looking at a future conversation and what does learning look like as we move forward into a new era well, I was going to say post-COVID. I'm not sure we're ever going to get quite post-COVID the way that we're going, but no doubt that this has turned us upside down in so many ways, and we're all living this learning in a very different way. In fact, you might see one of my young ones come running in the background here as I've gotten used to working at home and managing them at the same time, and they're learning, right? Trying to managing the work that we're all doing, and I'm sure many of you are doing the same. So we're thrilled. I think we have an incredible conversation ahead of us in the next hour. We have some of New York State's top teachers with us today to help us think about what learning will look like moving forward. And I can think of no better crew than to have this conversation than those that we have gathered together here. So with that, we'll turn it over to our moderator today, Elizabeth Day, who is the 2005 New York State Teacher of the Year from Mechanicville Central School District. So Elizabeth, over to you.
Thank you, Dean Lane. Welcome to everyone. We might as well get started. I have a question for all Teachers of the Year to think about. And this question is, as practicing public school teachers, what lessons have you learned from the current situation that you're going to use in the future? And how can this make education better? Rachel, maybe you'll want to start.
Sure. Thank you so much, Liz. So I think that some lessons that we have learned is that the tech has been opened for some staff members who maybe had been reticent before, and we need to make sure that we support their continued learning as we go back into the school year, because I think that we're going to have at least some type of hybrid situation for our students who are immunocompromised and are not able to be in person with us. And so we want to make sure that we're supporting our students with that, and also our colleagues. And then just the fact that, it's reinforced to me the inequities that we have, at home. And we want to make sure that we are diligently paying attention to those in the sense that we support our most needy students.
Thank you, Rachel. Christopher?
I hope this comes to everybody happy and healthy. And I know we're all going through this together. I think that the lesson learned from this experience with COVID-19 virus is it's confirmed to me. I don't know if it's a lesson learned or more of a confirmation, but proactive communication with our families and our parents and our grandparents that are caregivers for our children is so utterly important, because more than ever right now, we're relying on their help. And if that was established, everything, you can't just build that in the middle of a pandemic. Everything that we do prior to an emergency or prior to a challenging situation has to be done in advance. So the classrooms that I'm seeing is successful right now. The lesson that I can learn from is, or all we can all learn from, is that we need to be very proactive in our communication and open and reaching out constantly to our families in good times and in bad times, because it pays dividends when the challenges get big like we're facing right now.
Open communication with parents, grandparents, caregivers is so, so very important.
Yeah.
Alhassan, Ashli, Katie, any thoughts?
Yeah, so I think a big lesson here is the importance of taking the time to learn our students' stories. Because to go back to what Christopher said, it's important to be proactive, not only in the area of engaging with parents, but understanding our students' home life, their backgrounds, and their hopes, their dreams, their fears, because that is how you would be able to influence them, and especially during this time period. And I think those who are successful at this point in engaging their students are those who had that strong foundation at the beginning of the school year.
Mm-hmm.
I'll jump in. I totally agree with what everybody's saying. It's imperative that we are working really closely together with our families. What this really brought to mind for me is way back when I used to do Taekwondo and I was an instructor, we had like a motto that we would say that started with, "I will teach this class as if it is the most important class I will ever teach." And now that I look back on March 13th, the last day I was with my students, I just review in my head, was I doing my very best that day? And even though all the days put together are how you make up your community of learners, you can't let one slip by. You have to be really aware of each day, how you're making every kid feel, and how you're building your community, because you never know when something like this will happen. And that's what I take forward from this, is I hope that when we get back together in the classroom, that I'll be able to pause in those frustrating moments and say, am I teaching this class the best that I could teach today?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Katie. Ashli, any final thoughts on this first question?
Sure. Fortunately, I have a strong relationship with all the parents because I teach a self-contained class, and I'll have students from the time they're 14 until they're 21. So I had a few freshmen this year and was thankful that I was able to develop a relationship with the parents right away. I do share my cell phone number with parents. I do text parents frequently, and I know that can be a controversial issue. How much personal information do you give parents to be able to contact you? But the parents that I work with, I mean, I have 12 students, at the most 9 this year. They know that they can contact me day or night. So sharing my cell phone with them is something that I've always done since I started teaching. And I'm glad I did, because it's very easy to send a text and reach out if a student hasn't joined an online Zoom session or hasn't completed a certain number of minutes for participation on Lexia or RazKids or any of the online Zern for math programs that I'm using right now with them. So I think that that's important to have multiple ways to communicate with parents through Remind, which I use with my class to let them know that a new Google assignment is up in Google Classroom, to being able to text parents, call parents. I have all their emails. And I think that developing that relationship at the beginning of the year, and also making sure that you have up-to-date contact information for parents in case anything happens that we're not expecting, as it did this year. We need to make sure that we have that available, and that we have that strong bond and relationship with families.
Thank you very much. So thinking about being proactive with our families and building community, learning our kids' stories, and taking advantage of every day, every minute that we have with our kids. I think you all said it quite nicely. Let's move on to question 2. What would you not want to duplicate when schools reopen, and why? Why would you not want that duplicated? And it's open. Who would like to start?
I can start. So the thing that has been the hardest for me in this is just not seeing my kids every day. And the fact that, I have 140 some kids, and I want to see them every single day. And even though I'm in contact with them weekly now, it's not enough when I don't see them every single day, because you know, if I don't get to see them, I don't necessarily get to see their body language. You know, I can tell that something's wrong just when they're walking down the hallway. And so I'm really kind of, I want to see them every single day. And so I want to make sure that, you know, we're doing even more to make sure that our students who are most vulnerable are coming to school, you know, more regularly maybe than they were before. But also the fact that, you know, there's a lot of strain on, you know, parents, especially now with, you know, economic situations and learning from home. And so I think we also need to take that into consideration, because we really are all on the same team. We just maybe are coming at it from a different viewpoint.
So I'm looking at this a little bit from, oh, sorry.
That's fine, Ashli. Go right ahead.
Okay. I'm looking at this a little bit from two perspectives. One as a teacher at a high school working with students with special needs, and another as a school board president in my community. And I've served on the school board for 3 years on Grand Island. And one of the things that I wouldn't want to repeat is our scramble to provide students with the technology that they need. The inequities that we have just in our area amongst grade levels. So for example, our second graders didn't have a way to participate in Seesaw and things like that. So we were taking buses out to families, delivering iPads. Well, those are things maybe that the students should have had before this pandemic happened. And just devices that we brought to students and things that we made sure students had that I wished students would have had before we had a situation like this to deal with. So I think if there's one thing that schools should be sure of, it's that students that don't have access to computers, iPads, Chromebooks, and the technology that they need should do everything in their power to try to close that digital divide.
I'll go, Liz. You know, there's two ways to look at what we're going through right now. We've got current pandemic, how we're going to deal with it. I'm anticipating in our area, I'm up in Rochester, New York. I'm anticipating going back in September, and I'm anticipating probably a 2 to 3 week, all of a sudden we have to be out of school again. And what are we going to do with that time period if an infection does come into our district? So in the immediate time period, we have to come up with plans that say stop, start, but also have a continuum for education, that the children aren't and young adults are not lacking in their education during that time period, and that there's a smooth transition. So like what Ashli's saying, having devices available to make sure that transition happens needs to happen almost seamlessly without taking a day off. And those plans have to be made by districts, because if we're looking at New York City versus rural upstate New York, we're going to have a totally different plan by district. So that has to be thought out. But also, I'm looking at the greater picture. What's to be learned from this whole pandemic? Eventually, we're going to get past this. And what can be learned from it? Well, I do know that the way I assess my students right now has been limited. The way I can tell if there's learning going on has been limited. So we have to look at multiple measures that sometimes the online diagnostics might not totally tell the story, especially if they're doing it from home. So we've got to really consider, how can we tell that learning is happening when they are remote from school? So what I'm taking from this and what I won't duplicate again, well, I guess what I won't duplicate again is that we really have to consider multiple measures, even to a greater degree. I don't know if there's a tremendous amount of change in my pedagogy, but we have to look at that multiple measures piece, because it's going to be very difficult to assess our students' learning from a distance when we're not in the same room as them. So that's something to think about as we move forward.
A quick thought to wrap this question up.
Yeah, so I think from looking back in my experience, along with my colleagues, some of us who ended up having a much smoother transition were those who were already embracing technology along with the traditional methods of teaching. So in looking back, for me now moving forward, that would be an essential part of my teaching, because who knows what fall will look like. We could, like Christopher just mentioned, we could all of a sudden be out of the classroom. Well, I want to ensure that my students' learning would continue despite the location. And I think for me, that's what I would not want to duplicate.
Well, thank you very much. Some very thoughtful answers on that question. We'll move along to the third question. Now that we know that students are not returning for this academic school year, what type of assessments and grading and end of the year completion requirements are in place for students? I know you have some thoughts about next year, but how will this all play out this year? And Ashli, would you please take this question?
Sure. Okay, so I'll answer it from both perspectives again. In terms of seniors, I'd like to talk about our seniors for a minute, because I know that some of you that are on this call may have a student that's a senior in high school and think, oh, they're missing their graduation, they're missing walking across the stage. And I've actually worked very closely with my superintendent at Grand Island to come up with an alternate plan for a graduation ceremony that I think honors the tradition of a ceremony, and yet will give parents and students the final send-off that they deserve. And so what we're going to do is have a, at first I'll tell you about our first plans were to have cars in front of the school and do kind of like a drive-in where everything's pushed out to their devices in terms of students walking across the high school stage. And I said, you know, we don't have enough spaces in our parking lot for that. We'd have to do it by guidance counselor last name, and it would be great if all the seniors were together, but yet we honored social distancing. So what we decided to do was to have it at Beaver Island State Park. So we talked to our local officials and booked that. So we're actually having every senior have a car. There'll be passengers in the car. We'll have a stage set up from the town and FM transmitters like they're at a drive-in. Almost they can hear my commencement speech, the superintendent's commencement speech, the valedictorian's commencement speech, and so on. And we'll have a stage set up. We won't be giving the diplomas on the stage, but the students will walk the stage and then get back in their cars. The cars will pull up in a lined fashion and then exit the park, get the diploma and any scholarship information in a packet, pull back around for the turning of the tassels. So we'll have a complete ceremony, and every parent will be up front when their child walks across the stage for pictures, which is great. It won't be at Kleinhand's Music Hall, but it will be at an outdoor park with a rain date in case that it rains. And every parent will get wonderful pictures because they'll be up front, able to get out of their car, take pictures, and then go back around for the turning of the tassels. So from that perspective, looking at it, you know, how do you close out the year and still have some normalcy? We try to do that for our seniors. In terms of teaching,
I'm sorry. Thank you. I think that many school districts have come up with some really clever ways to honor their children. But I'd like to take a look for a second at the assessments and the grading that teachers are looking at for end of the year, in addition to what you contributed with the graduation ceremony. And maybe Alhassan, can you speak to that for me, please? Something about how things will be assessed, how grades will be dealt with.
Yes, I think the key word here is flexibility, because the situation that we are all in is so dire, especially in the district I teach in District 7th in the South Bronx. You know, many of my students, like it has been mentioned earlier, did not have access to iPads until like 3 weeks into remote learning. So was it their fault that their learning did not continue? No, they just didn't have access to the resources that they needed. So then I do appreciate the grading policy that New York City came up with, which is titled "Do No Harm." And to summarize, basically what it is that up until March 13, which was our last day of being in the building, wherever our students were, they could only go up from that point on. And what I appreciate about that is that, you know, it gives the students who are doing well the opportunity to continue to do well, but also students who are lagging behind. This is more like a motivation for them now, because it's an opportunity for them to be able to excel at new heights that they would not otherwise. In terms of specifically classroom practice, For me, it's about taking the approach of a holistic assessment, because it is not only about the academic component of this, but the social and emotional well-being of the student at this point. So taking that in total, flexibility comes to mind a lot when I think about how the school year should end. And to give a quick example of that, usually this unit which we are about to wrap up, there are usually 3 major assessments with that. You know, my students will do a debate, then they will write an essay, and then they will take a final exam. Well, at this point, it's difficult to do all 3. So then I give students the option. So they could either take the exam, or they could write a reflective piece on the unit, or they could write the final argumentative essay, which any of them would suffice to demonstrate mastery of the content.
Thank you, Alhassan. That's giving options is always a good idea, and especially at this time. Thank you very much for those reflections. I'd like to move on to the next question, question 4. What resources and professional development do you believe teachers will need to meet their students' needs in the future in light of this pandemic? And Rachel, I really would like to hear your thoughts on this. Would you start, please?
One priority for both the teachers and for the students is the social emotional situation that we're going to be facing, and all the ramifications that came from the sudden departure. We didn't get to say goodbye. We had, for example, in my district, we had a superintendent's day on that Thursday and no school on Friday, and so it was that Wednesday before, that was the last time that we saw them. And so I think we really need to focus on making sure that our teachers and our students are aware of, what they're feeling and, how they're coping with things. And that needs to start prior to school. And obviously we need to be working on that now, but just going back to school, coming back together again, I think we need to focus on that first before anything. And then that kind of circles back to what Christopher just talked about with the fact that we could be there for 2 or 3 weeks and then have to leave again. And so, that is our number one priority. Some other things I think that we need to focus on, that stem from that are trauma-informed instruction, because I also feel like, school is a safe place for a lot of our kids, and it's a stable place. And I want to make sure that, teachers are informed to look for certain things, or to, maybe something seems a little off, or, not to ignore the fact that a student is acting up, because 99% of the time when a student is acting up, it's because something else is going on. It has nothing to do with the acting up. And so I think we need to focus on that. I think that there's going to be a little level of PTSD when it comes to having to access things online again, especially for students and teachers who did not embrace technology prior to this. And I think we need to honor that. I think that that was scary, and they got pushed into doing a lot of things that maybe were outside their comfort zone. And then lastly, I think that we need to make sure that we are meeting our teachers where they are. And most teachers have leveled up in their technology integration, and we need to continue to support that, because, now that this has happened, we need to make sure that we have a plan in place in case it does happen again, because no one can say for 100% sure that this is not going to happen again. And so providing that support, which I realize is probably going to be on the back burner for a lot of districts because of the lack of financial support that, we have, or access to funds that we have for things like that. So I think that we need to make the learning of our teachers and supporting that learning, a priority as well.
Thank you, Rachel. Alhassan, any thoughts on this as far as professional development and resources needed for the fall?
Yes. In thinking about that, it just reminds me that at the core of teaching is relationships, because it's difficult, if not impossible, to influence a student if you don't know what influences their students. And unfortunately, not all of us are equipped to build those meaningful relationships. So I think a professional development in the area of relationship building would be paramount during this time period, so that those foundations could be solidified the first 2 weeks of the school year. And, in case anything happens, at least people have the foundation that they need to move on if they need to online. And with regards to resources, I the CASUL website, CASUL, if you're not familiar with, is Collaborative of Academics, Social and Emotional Learning. They have tons of resources with regards to dealing with social and emotional learning issues in the classroom as well as outside of the classroom for parents as well. So I think those two things would be paramount for us to have in the fall.
Okay, thank you very much. Katie, I know you work with younger children. Do you have a different thought about this? Alhassan and Rachel work with some of the older children. So can we hear something about the younger kids and what teachers might need for them?
Well, I agree with what they're saying, but one of the things that's been on my mind is parents, because we have to meet the parents where they are, and they may need some training too. I don't know what happened in other districts, but I know in Schenectady, Friday the 13th was our last day, and then Monday, the following Monday, we were up and running on Seesaw. Now for teachers, that meant that we watched some instructional videos, set up our classrooms and got going, but students didn't have training and parents didn't have training. So when we think about professional development, we have to remember our whole community, and we have to have the kids have a good understanding of what they're going to be expected. But we also have to, talk to the parents and give them some training too, because, a very big part of my first week was trying to instruct parents on how to use the classroom platform. And it was very challenging and upsetting for some of them. So I think that it's really important to keep in mind our entire community when we think of professional development, not just the teachers, which is going to be incredibly difficult in terms of making sure we're all on board with technology, and then keeping in mind that the social emotional learning component is going to be huge, but also the parents are going to need us as well.
Katie, that really leads us right into the next question, and I'd like you to continue some thoughts on that one. This question states that the current situation has significantly shifted the relationship between parents and teachers and students. What advice do you have for other teachers in terms of working effectively with parents and families to support the community of learning? For example, what specific advice might you have for parents as they try to navigate this home instruction?
Well, I've said it a lot of times to a lot of parents, and I've said it to teachers too, and I just keep saying it over and over. We have to have relentless faith and optimism in each other. It's been very challenging for parents, and I think as teachers, it's our job to keep the focus on the fact that we're all in this together. And so I've had a number of parents express multitudes of concerns to me, and I just keep going back to, thank you for what you're doing. We're all in this. And by all, I mean the whole country, the whole world. We're all in this together. There isn't going to be certain people that are ahead of others. We're all at the same spot. And as long as you're doing the best you can, and I'm doing the best I can for the students, then they're going to benefit from what we're doing together. It's incredibly important that we meet the parents where they are. I've seen some questions even pop up in the chat with parents who aren't responding, and other things related to that. And that's where the relentless optimism comes in. You have to just keep on them in a positive way that helps them to feel that whenever they are ready to help and in whatever way, it's going to be accepted. I talked to one parent last week. I try to contact every parent every week, but the one parent in particular, I haven't had any submissions from her child the whole time. And she's just been going through a lot. Their family has been really struggling. And she finally said, can I just get papers? And I said, yes, I will get you papers if that's what you need. And I have another parent, again, her child hasn't been submitting anything. So I just keep leaving messages and sending messages. What can I do to help? I'm here with you. It's not too late to get started. And the child started this week. So, you have to be relentlessly optimistic and meet the parents where they are.
That's great, Katie. Relentlessly optimistic. Christopher, could you add something to that?
Sure, I can. I think that Katie said a lot right there, and I'm just going to reiterate a lot of the things that she said. Every home is different, and that's been the big eye opener. We're suddenly in people's kitchens, and they're suddenly in my kitchen or on their couch and all that during this whole pandemic. So it's like that my class has invaded my house, and I've kind of invaded their house a little bit. So we're in each other's spaces right now. And what that's provided, I think there's a silver lining in that. And that what that's done is it's allowed me to really see what life is like for my children outside of school. What also I've learned from this is nobody is immune to all this, the challenges and the pinch of a pandemic. Some of my strongest students are the ones that actually have the greatest needs right now emotionally. And it's because their parents are both still working, their parents are coming home, their parents are sitting down with them, and they don't want to ask the teacher for help online. They feel it's their responsibility. So it's very naive to say, well, it's going to only affect a very small part of our population. One of the most important things I would say advice to a teacher is that we have to be really aware that kids that were doing great all along and come from homes that we call, great homes, solid homes, they might be the ones in greatest need right now because they're running their engine pretty hot. As for parents, my advice to them, reach out to your teachers. Don't be afraid to contact them. And teachers really do care about their students, and they want it the best for their students, and they want to talk to you. So I would say make sure that you're communicating with your teachers. Don't hesitate on reaching out. And I think it's a good thing to get your kids into a pattern. If we're going to be facing sunny weather, we've hit our first really nice sunny day here in Rochester, New York. And it's going to be hard come 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, or as the days get longer, to get that homework or that schoolwork done in the evenings when it's still nice out. So I would get you in the habit of get it going in early on in the morning as best as you can, and reach out to that teacher that can help out with the education, because we want to be teaching right now, and we should be teaching right now. So please get your kids online with us, and we'll work with them. We'd love to.
Thank you, Christopher. This question is just so important. I'd actually like to hear from Ashli. Ashli, do you have some thoughts on the parent-family relationship?
Sure. I would just reiterate what everyone said about reaching out to teachers if they're struggling with getting online. I think that looking into the fall with curriculum and discrepancies in student learning, we're going to have to rely on differentiating instruction and draw from Carol Ann Tomlinson's research on differentiating instruction, and really be able to do that, because we'll have students at different points in their learning, I'm sure, because of this closure. It's not just the summer slide that we're going to see, but it's going to be the spring slide and summer slide combined. So I know that in terms of what we need to provide, what school needs to provide for parents and supporting parents, I wholeheartedly agree with what Katie said in terms of technology. Not every parent is adept at using technology, and that was a struggle for one of my families as well, and helping them get online was one of the things that we needed to do in order for that student to participate and be successful. Fortunately, my students are very comfortable with using Google Classroom, and we use Google Classroom during the school year, so that was something most of them could do, with the exception of one student, independently. So I think it's making sure that not only do students know how to use Google Classroom or whatever our platforms are at school, but also parents as well, and providing training in the evenings, workshops for parents so that they can learn how to use the technology that their children will have at home.
Thank you, Ashli. Rachel, I know that you're out in your community a lot with many of the service projects that you do. And I would like to know, I know you've spoken with parents. So what advice have you given them during this period of time, this unprecedented period of time? What have you said to them, Rachel?
Because just because you were in a food stable situation prior to this doesn't mean that you're still in a food stable situation. And so, that's my first question. My second question is, how can I help you? It doesn't matter if it's connecting you with another community resource, whether it is, I spend 3 or 4 hours a night on Zoom with a couple kids who I don't even have in class because they just need the, somebody sitting there with them to get their work done. I get some work done too, and so I'm able to help them manage their time, learn how to do some scheduling things. And, the parents have been very thankful for that because they just don't necessarily have the tools or the time because they're still working a lot. And, I have several parents, who are working more than they were working before. And, that puts an added strain too on, not having that person at home that motivates the kids to get the work done if they're not self-motivated. And then lastly, I just remind them that it's okay. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, it's okay. You are enough because this is a situation where none of us could have predicted. None of us were necessarily equipped to do it, the perfect Instagram way, I guess, if you want to say. So again, know that as a parent, if you are there for your kid in whatever it is that they need, or you can reach out and connect with a community resource to help your kid, then you're doing a great job. And, any way that I can help them is, just let me know. And going kind of back to what Ashli was saying with cell phone numbers, because I do run that nonprofit, most of the universe has my cell phone number. And I'm okay with that because, if I have a kid that reaches out at 11 o'clock because that's when they're struggling or having a problem, I want to make sure that I can, have that discussion with them. And I know that not everybody is comfortable with that and districts don't allow for that. That's just how I operate, whether it's through Remind or, a Schoology message or whatever. I just want to make sure that the kids know that there's like 62 different avenues that if you need to reach out, please do.
And Katie, just in a sentence or two, what are you saying to parents?
I'm telling them the same as Rachel. Number one, what can I do to help you? The second thing I'm saying is, if you're finding all of what we're posting difficult, then prioritize. And at my level, I say, please do reading first. Then math. And then the last thing I say is, I'll reiterate from before, we're all in this together. Please trust that when we get back to school, whenever that may be, your teachers are going to work with your children to help them through this. They're going to help them with their academics and meet them where they are. And we're going to be all over that social emotional component because we know that this has been traumatizing in a myriad of ways. So please trust in your educators. We know how to create miracles. We do it every day. We're ready to do it in September, October, November, whenever it is that we get to see your cute little babies when we're back there. And I am just excited to do whatever it takes when we get there because I miss my students so much.
Thank you, Katie. I'm sure that's the feeling of so many educators that they just can't see their kids and be with them. Thank you very much. We'll turn our attention to our last question. And Katie, you mentioned the fall again, and that leads us to our last question. How do you think the current situation is going to affect curriculum design in the fall? Ashli mentioned the summer slide. Are you going to expect them to enter with the same knowledge they had in the past? How are we going to prepare for the discrepancies? And what strategies do you think schools will need to take to assess the loss of learning from this year's closures? It's a big question. Take your time.
That's a lot. I want to start with, I don't know how the situation will affect curriculum in the fall, but I know what I think it should do. And what I think we should consider is that you can't just pick up in September with the normal curriculum. You have to take into account that we have missed not just weeks, but months of learning. And when I say you have to take that into account, I'm hoping that all the people in charge, be they superintendents or governors, that they understand that we have our standards, but we weren't able to teach as we should have. So I'm hoping that in regards to curriculum and testing especially, that there are some major changes in the way that we look at what kids are supposed to learn and understand by the end of the year. In terms of students entering with the same knowledge, I think it's obvious that there's going to be a really broad spectrum depending on the kids' ability to access online instruction, the amount of help they're getting. And so that brings me to the discrepancies in terms of student preparation. And I look at that in this way. When I get my class in September, the first thing I do when I'm getting to know them is try to get to know them academically. I learn about them as people and as students, and that's not going to change. I'm still going to do that. That's one of the best qualities of teachers, is that we look at kids as a whole. And when we meet them, we're not saying like, these are the things you should have, and so we're going from here. You assess where they are, meet them there, and then take them forward. And so we need to continue to do that as teachers, and I have every confidence that New York State teachers will do that without a doubt. And that's how we're going to account for the loss of learning. We're going to do what we always do. We're going to be the magicians we are. We're going to be the caretakers that we are. And we're going to look at our children, learn about our children, meet them where they are, and then move them forward.
Thank you, Katie. Alhassan, do you have some thoughts on this question?
Yes. So like Katie just mentioned, it is obvious that we can't continue to do business as usual this fall. We first have to assess our kids and meet them where they are. But more importantly, in terms of remedy, while there are a lot of talks about budget cuts, it should in no way, shape, or form impact our after-school programs this coming year, because that's going to be extremely crucial in terms of helping those students, not only this summer, but also spring slide, as Ashli mentioned. And because in order to get them where they need to be, we can't necessarily achieve that in the classroom alone this coming year. We need to think about online tutoring, after school programs, so that we are giving kids all the resources, all the tools that they need to be able to be at the level that they need to be.
Thank you. Christopher, some reflections on this question, please? Christopher?
I'm teaching at home and I have a barking dog, so I've been muting it off. The thing that I keep thinking about is with this rollout of technology happened so rapidly that we didn't get a lot of time to teach kids how to communicate online with each other and communicate with their teachers and what is socially appropriate and what is not socially appropriate online. So I think as we return to the fall, one of the pieces that I would like to see put into curriculum, because I think inevitably we're going to have something where we're going to have time where we might have remote learning again. We need to put into our curriculum a little bit more about, we talk about communication face-to-face, speaking and listening face-to-face, but what does that look like in a digital world online? And that's going to have to be brought in pretty quick in the fall, because who knows, you know, we might get back to school and all of a sudden a couple cases pop up in our district and we're shut down for a few weeks. So that piece is going to be really important to put in place early on.
Okay, thank you. Rachel, some thoughts on this, please?
Well, digital citizenship is always, you know, a very important aspect. And so I was just, you know, piggybacking onto what Christopher was saying. But also our district is just put a Google Doc out today where they want you as a classroom teacher to indicate what gaps going forward your kids can be expected to have next year based on, you know, what you were able to get through and what you were able to get through. But my concern is just because I was able to get through some of the curriculum, it doesn't mean, you know, that the kids were able to access it in a meaningful way or that it's stuck because there's, you know, things going on at their house that would normally not be as much of a distraction as it is now. So I think that we need to really rethink how we're going to go about doing this. But I also think that we need to meet, as Katie and Alhassan have very eloquently stated, meet the kids where they are. So if we have kids, you know, who were in a place where they were able to learn the material and retain the material, we need to keep them going where they are, but we need to not leave anybody behind. But then we also need to not stunt the growth of the kids that were able to get, you know, to access that learning. And so I think that that's another place where we can help support our teachers in how do we provide even more further differentiation than, you know, we're used to being able to provide our students with.
Thank you. Ashli?
Well, I think how curriculum will look different in my classroom is the hands-on learning and the learning out in the community. So with students with special needs, especially our life skills students, it's really important that we are able to take students out in the community to learn how to do everyday life skills like shopping or pre-vocational skills in a work type setting. So I have a work component program to my classroom, as well as field trips that we do every week to purchase items that we'll use for cooking lessons in class. And I don't know if that will happen next year because of everything that's going on. I don't know if we'll have field trips and opportunities to go, take students shopping. I also I write grants, and then I plan a lot of field trips to the theater and places that I know that my students have never been before. I had a student this year, at the beginning of the year, we went to the Theater of Youth to see a play. We were reading the book in class, and she said, "This is the first time I've been to the theater. I'm so excited to go here." So it's going to be very disappointing, I'll be honest, for my students if my curriculum is affected in terms of being able to provide those experiences. I know that we can do virtual field trips to museums. We can do virtual field trips to theaters and show them what it looks like. But it's not the same as actually being there and experiencing it.
I would just like all of the teachers of the year to consider this for a second. We've talked about having strategies, but I know you all have bags of tricks. And I would love to know a couple of your specific strategies that are going to help you meet your students where they are when you see them again in the fall.
Is it okay if I start, Liz?
Sure.
So I'm just going to echo basically what we've all said today, and that is you just have to get to know your kids, because if you get to know your kids, you can then design, what's going to be most helpful for them. But the other thing is their voice needs to be heard in how you design this, because just because I think I know where they are and what might be the best way for them to go about, accessing the learning, that might not be how they best access it. And so I think it's really important that we include our students in that discussion and that plan. And then them having ownership over that plan, I think might make that plan ultimately more successful.
Thank you. Alhassan?
Yes, I completely agree with that. And I think for me, going back to the fall, it's again, you can't influence somebody if you don't know what influences them. So the idea, so one trick I do with my students is, to write a letter to them, to their future selves. So, imagine it's June. Tell me what hopes, what fears, what dreams do you have for this year? And through that process, I am able to learn not only about that student's writing abilities, but also their home life and as well as their aspirations.
Thank you. Christopher?
I think,
what's in that bag of tricks?
What's that? My
What's
bag
in
of
that bag of
tricks. Well, I've always been an unconventional teacher, so I think just looking at the individual aspirations, like Alhassan said, the individual aspirations of each student. One of the most important components of a successful classroom is that the teacher doesn't fully own the classroom. It's shared with the students. More than ever, as we head into this fall, that's going to be an important component, because kids are going to need to feel that empowerment again. They've been out of school now. They have not been in a school building for 5-6 months. And that empowerment piece of ownership is going to play a huge role in this thing. What that's going to look like? Well, listening to the kids, letting them take over different parts of the class, and that's different for every teacher, but letting them feel like they own that classroom again and they are back at school.
Thank you very much. Relentless optimism, and how can I help you, along with all the other wonderful things you all said today. I'm going to turn this over for questions at this point in time, and so I'll turn this over to Jerry.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you all for your questions this afternoon. I'm going to ask Cheryl Dozier, who's been monitoring the chat box, to raise some of the questions that have been posted to the panelists.
So one of the questions and comments focused on the need to share your self-care or you're coping with students to, and then I'm going to connect that with another piece to avoid burnout. So perhaps each person could share one self-care tip with the group.
Cheryl, I can go on that one. I did respond to it actually in the chat. The question about burnout was the question in there. And I think what happens with online learning, it's consuming. So it's entering our own houses. And one of the things that I know personally is I have to set parameters if I'm going to be a successful teacher. So I do need some time away to be able to be fresh again for my students. So if you are teaching out of your house right now, that you really need to set those parameters and allow yourself some away time, because it can become very, very consuming in our houses. And I think that's why a lot of us feel very tired right now, is we are putting in extended days. A lot of us are checking things at 8, 9 o'clock at night because kids are turning things in at 8, 9 o'clock at night. But we have to set those parameters for ourselves if we're going to be at our best.
Mm-hmm. Chris, just to piggyback on that, I also think it's important for you to know yourself well enough to know, A, what brings you joy, and B, what helps you get your mind off of school, so that when you're on school, you're most present. And for example, for me, sunsets are one of my big things, and I've also been, getting into sunrises lately because I'm actually home for the sunrise instead of being at school. And so making sure I'm taking time for that, but then also making sure that I'm going for a walk every single day. I have reprioritized me going for a walk every single day, because back in the day when I actually had more time in my life, that's the way I would solve problems, is be out for a walk. And now it's just the fresh air, it's the sunshine, it's just the away from a screen that's really helping to re-energize me.
Can I go next?
Yes.
The first thing I thought of, I actually saw the burnout question, and I think about that a lot. And what comes to mind is when you're on the airplane and they're talking about the masks, and they always say, put your mask on first. And I think it's brilliant, because you have to really remember that when it comes to answering an email at 9 o'clock at night. You have to say to yourself, am I answering this email because I want to and it's the right thing to do, or do I need to put my mask on first and answer it in the morning? You have to think about what you need. And I totally agree with Rachel. I do think that people need nature. And I think you have to keep that in mind and draw those boundaries, like Chris said. I think that it's really admirable to be answering emails and questions and doing things at all hours. But if you don't take care of yourself first, if you don't put that mask on first, you're not going to be good for your children and your students.
I completely agree with that. And I think the idea of boundaries is so important during this time period, because during this school year, when we were in the building, there was a set time, and now it feels that there is no end time. So it's important then to say to your students, and I know as teachers, especially, highly achieving teachers, this is difficult for us, to let your kids know what is okay and what is not. I mean, yes, if you send me an email at 9 p.m., I might respond, but don't expect a response. Giving them time that, hey, 8 to 5, I'm available anytime. But then after 5 o'clock, I might respond, but I might not. So at least that gives me the flexibility. Like Katie said, if I'm going to respond to that email, well, I'm doing it because I want to do it, not because I have to do it. And I think that does take off a lot of pressure off us.
And Ashli?
I would just echo what everyone else said too. And I think it's whatever makes you happy and whatever makes you feel energized and refreshed, whether it's taking a walk or exercising, going to the gym, or in working out on a treadmill or equipment in your basement. Whatever it is that you like to do that is your time, I think you need to take that time for yourself.
Thank you so much. And we do have one other question about building relationships with kindergarten families and how to apprentice kindergarten students and families into a school district when they may not yet have had the experience with technology. So if someone would like to take that question.
Katie, you teach second grade. Perhaps you have some thoughts on the younger children?
You know, I think that there comes a time when you do have to, if they don't have the experience with the technology, you do have to be willing to reach out in other ways. And I know that some of my kindergarten teacher friends have spent some time making porch visits. So I don't feel that I can recommend that to everyone because I think safety is a priority. But I think you do have to sort of be creative in the ways that you reach out to families if they haven't had experience with the technology yet. And one of the things that I've learned to do is to do like the screencastify, and you have to keep in mind and be able to instruct parents in a way that's going to reach them. So I don't think I really have a brilliant answer for that, but it always comes back to how can you reach them? Call them, send a letter through the mail if you have to, and like I said, like you might even go visit at their home. I'm not really sure.
Thank you. Christopher, you shared a couple of ideas in the chat. Do you want to elaborate for a moment?
Yeah, that's why I didn't respond right away. You know, it's almost like a cascading effect. The lower the grade level, the more you need the parents on board with you, right? So as we're looking at that, a kindergarten for preschool, I've got a preschool teacher up the street from me that I teaches in my building that I'm thinking about right now and what she does. The snippets of time that we're going to be able to have these kids attention-wise online on a screen is going to be very, very limited. So I think that if we're really trying to be academic with these kids, there's going to be a hit either way, and we have to be very realistic about this. But children are touchy-feely, they're kinesthetic learners. And so to incorporate something kinesthetically with their families to be doing at home, along with some type of academics, is going to be very important. But the other part of it is, as we get lower with grade levels, these relationships with parents are going to have to go up, and we're going to have to be very, very, we have to be reaching out in so many different ways with those parents.
Thank you all for taking time to answer the questions that have come up in the chat box.
Well, thank you again for joining us today. A round of applause for our panelists. There are several other questions that I will probably ask you to address, and there's some not at this time since we've arrived at 5 o'clock, but being mindful of your and respectful of your time. But, you know, I'd like you to give some thought, because these questions will be coming your way, and I'll post them on our website. Some of the questions are about how we work with students whose first language is not English and their families, and how are we meeting their needs. And these are really great questions that many of the people on today are educators who want to learn about how they can really meet those needs and those challenges that they're facing. And I don't think that it's just a temporary problem. This is an ongoing problem. And so unfortunately, we don't have time to dig into that question because that's a deep question. But I will circle back to all of you. I know your emails and I'll ask for you to give some thought to that, and I'll share those responses to those questions electronically to to the individuals who attended today. And before we leave, I just wanted to make everyone aware that this video and other information associated with the community conversation presentations and some other School of Education initiatives are available on the remoteed.org website. So I just want you to be aware of that particular URL. And we will be, and within a week's time, you should receive a copy of this presentation sent to you via email. But if you don't receive it for any reason, and it goes into spam, do check out remoteed.org. So with that said, I would like to thank our presenters today and our moderator, Elizabeth Day. You have all been wonderful ambassadors and leaders for teachers in the state of New York, and I'm very pleased to be associated with you and having had the opportunity to work with you for over 20 years. So thank you. And thank you all for joining us today. And we hope to see you next week in Community Conversations.
Thank you for organizing this, Jerry.
Jerry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stay safe, everybody.
Stay safe.
All right. Bye-bye.
Stay well.
Thank you.